So you can start, you can take over the lead.
Oh, just now you said 3:30, so no problem. So the first talk is I'll be talking about the future of glaucoma management. I'll share my slide.
Yes, sir. Please share. Please share. Yeah,
How
make
much
it.
minutes I have?
Sir, there's the three talk. You can.
My talk is 20 minutes.
Yes, sir. 20 minutes.
Okay, fine. So will you keep the timer also?
Yeah, yeah. I'll keep.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be talking about the newer developments in glaucoma management. So if you look from the last 6-7 decades, we have moved from the Shiodes to applanation, and then we are now talking about the IOP sensors, which can be implanted along with the IOL or glaucoma implants. If you look in perimetry, from kinetic to Goldman, we are now talking about virtual perimeter. From medication, we have from
Sir, sorry to interrupt you. The slide is not full screen.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sure.
Okay, fine, sir. Fine, sir.
Okay, fine. From drugs, we have moved from the pilocarpine to the newer molecules like Ropresa, Rocletan, Vyzulta, matlab Nitasodil, latanoprost binoid, and combination of nitasodil and latanoprost. From surgery, having high risk, high complication rate, or very good, very minimal complication trabeculectomy to a vast numbers of MIGS and the newer iStent which would be available in India in coming year or two. So there are lots of research, lots of advances in happen in glaucoma. I'll be talking about newer advances in diagnosis, medical management, surgical management. I don't have much time, and I'll be talking a little bit about teleglaucoma because like COVID pandemic going on, we cannot examine the patients. In future, it would be a reality where we don't have to examine patients like we are doing nowadays. We can manage the patient from home also most of the time. So the first is diagnosis. So the IOP, because the intraocular pressure measurement is very important aspect of glaucoma management. The trigger fish contact lens is available, which can be we can give overnight to the patient and measure diurnal, the nocturnal IOP. Though it doesn't measure IOP, we can get a fair idea. The newer devices like the implant. These are very small implants. It can be implanted along with the IOL for the continuous human monitoring. The human trials are underway, and hopefully we will have these kind of devices. Though it's limited because we can implant only with the intraocular lens or with the glaucoma drainage devices. So all patient we cannot monitor this, but at least in the patients who had surgery, we can implant and we can get a very good idea of 24 hours pressure. The perimetry, the 10 days to, there some research showed that 10 days to can pick up more glaucomatous point, the field effect, even in early glaucoma. So now we have 24 days 2C pattern where there are 10 point added extra in 24-2 in the near central fovea to pick up the early glaucoma. And this is one of the example. You can see 24-2 having no field effect and 24 days 2 of same patient showing so much of field effect close to the near fixation. So this is the new advance which is now already we have in clinical practice. The compass perimetry is a scanning ophthalmoscope with the perimeter. So what we can do here, it machine has, of course, machine also has a more extra point for the central area like 24 days to see. It uses the ZEST technology, and you can superimpose along with the on the photograph. So you get an idea that on which retinal area, what is the retinal sensitivity, and this is how the printout looks, and this is comparison of the along with the Humphrey. So this is compass, this is perimetry. The virtual perimetry is going to be a new advance where we can do the perimetry even at the home. A patient doesn't have to do a cumbersome test like we are currently doing. The palm scan, this machine I have used, I had collected some data also, and I'll just show you one. So this patient had here the inferior close to fixation defect, very similar, not same. So, and we had collected around 20 patients, and the agreement was very good with the Humphrey and virtual perimeter. This is another Melbourne Rapid Field. So they also have threshold and supra threshold test and very good agreement with the Humphrey. The therapeutics, we have a vast number of research advances in last decade or two. We have newer molecule, we have newer fixed combination, we have preservative technology, and we have newer drug delivery system like microelectrical mechanical system and nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is a future. So newer molecule, we have ROCK inhibitors and letrozole, reparsodil, both are available in generic form in India. Latanoprostene Benoid, not available. The combination of letrozole, latanoprost, not available so far in India. And there are newer drug which is under human trial, trabodazone and omidipine isopropyl. So if you look ROCK inhibitors, the letrozole inhibits the RHO kinase and norepinephrine transporter. It relaxes the trabecular meshwork and scamp's, so it increases the trabecular outflow, and it also inhibits the sodium potassium ATPase in ciliary epithelial cells. So it also reduces the aqueous production. So it has a two effect. Of course, there are other potential effect, possible neuroprotection, anti-inflammatory effect. Some people have already used in post-glaucoma surgery in a failing BLEB to improve the BLEB function also. This is the published data that IOP reduction is similar to timolol, but the night time it reduces the IOP where timolol fails to reduce the IOP. The hyperemia is one of the most common side effect, is more than beta blocker, but no systemic side effect. If you look at the heart rate compared to the beta blocker, there was no impact on the heart rate. So there is no systemic side effect. We have around 40 patients on letrozole and repasodil. The IOP reduction was more in letrozole. We have not used as primary molecule. Usually we have used a third or fourth molecule. We had to withdraw the in some patients mainly because of hyperemia, and we had 3 patients of corneal edema also. So that is one thing we have to remember. There are case reports of corneal edema in a decompensated cornea. Latanoprostene Benoid is another nitric oxide synthetase, nitric oxide donating latanoprost. It has a, of course, IOP reduction. IOP reduction is little better than latanoprost. And this is the Voyager randomized study, which shows that IOP reduction was better. The trabodazone is not available clinically. Basically, it also augments the natural function of trabecular meshwork. The phase 3 trial failed to show study, but they are modifying, and most probably it would come in the market in near future. This is the selective EP2 receptor agonist. Again, the studies are going on. At this point in time, the first study shows that it was non-inferior to latanoprost. So IOP reduction was as good as latanoprost. The advantage is that it uses the trabecular outflow facility also. So it is little different than the prostaglandin analog which we are using. The fixed combination, like as I said, letrozole, latanoprost is not available. Hopefully some companies will catch the generic. Then lots of triple combinations are under research. So hopefully the triple combination will reduce the BAK because 3 dropped in the same bottle, and it would have the less side effect and the better adherence. Then preservative-free Unims, we have certain drugs Unims, and the other is Novelia technology, which would, from Indian perspective, is a great thing because it's cheaper. We can give a bottle and it can last for a month, cheaper than the Unims, and no preservative. The other new thing, nanotechnology. The nanotechnology is the future. It's a convergence of science and engineering. So the advantage of nanotechnology is that we have a very small object. So what happens that they have a greater surface area to the volume ratio. So the effect would be significantly more than the regular particle. And there are various delivery systems. I'm not going to go in detail. We have nanoparticle, nanoemulsions, nanodiamond, nanocrystal, and so forth. As far as glaucoma is concerned, we have a various nanodrug delivery systems in the research. We have various devices also where the nanodrug can be loaded in the implant and it can be inserted. We also have a IO monitoring, as I mentioned, IOP monitoring device in the beginning, that is a nanoparticle. We have gene therapy under research using nanotechnology. So lots of potential. The one is this drug loaded device. So this is the implant. You have a drug inside and you implant it. The other is the same. This is very small, and the clinical trials underway. The other is punctal plug delivery system. So it's a sustained release, and the travoprost and latanoprost drugs would be available And the phase 3 trial showed that the IOP reduction was around 3 to 5.5 millimeter mercury in POAG patients. We need to see the retention because there is a risk of the exclusion also. The phase 2 clinical trial on latanoprost showed a 20% IOP reduction, and the retention rate was 90%, which is reasonably good. We'll have intracameral implant. The Durista bimetoprazole implant is already approved in US FDA. So you implant, the drug can remain for quite a few long time, and IOP reduction is approximately 30%. And advantage is no local side effect because it is inside the eye. The trioprost implant also is under research, the iodose glucose, but this is a different device. This is like eye stent. So we implant in the trabecular meshwork, and the phase 2 study showed that IOP reduction was around 30-35% for 12 months. The bimetoprazole ring, there are multiple size. The ring, the problem was that there is a high rate of exclusion. Now glaucoma surgery, there are various, we have modified the Penco techniques, has reduced the rate of complications. So trabeculectomy is gold standard, and there are lots and lots of MIGS, which is under research. Eye stent would be available in USA. It's done quite commonly, but you must remember that most of the MIGS is for open angle glaucoma, and importantly, they are for the mild to moderate disease. In India, where we see more of a moderate, severe, advanced disease, the MIGS has no role. So we still have to go for the standard surgery, which is trabeculectomy. The last part, as I said, that during COVID, we realized that we cannot examine the patient routinely. So teleglaucoma was under research for a long time. Of course, it speeded up, the research speeded up, and there are lots of things would come in near future. So I mentioned IOP sensors. There would be a remote slit lamp app on the mobile. A patient can take the self-imaging and can be sent to the doctors. So this is one. The second, I did already talk about the PALM and MRF. So the technician can go to the patient's home, do the perimetry. Of course, the limitation is we do not have progression software, and glaucoma being a chronic progressive disease, we require a progression software. So not now, but in near future, yes. And there are a portable slit lamp available. So this is developed by Duke University. This is developed by the MIMO OCT system. This is by the Notal Vision. They all are portable machine, and you can just take the technician take the machine to the patient's home, and they can do the OCT also. So it is like a true teleglaucoma. From IOP, vision also can be measured online. Everything can be done. IOP measured, perimetry can be done, OCT can be done. Of course, we need progression software. It is too early to say, but to conclude, there are newer options available. We have lots of new drugs, like we don't have all, but we have netazoxanide, ripasudil, which can be used not as a primary, but as a third, fourth line agent, especially in COVID time where we cannot operate all the patients. Or any other situation where surgery is difficult, we can add those medications and medically manage the patients. The nanotechnology is going to be a future. Safer surgical options. MIGS, as I said, that for early glaucoma, lots of research is going on. I didn't talk about much because of lack of time. And the teleglaucoma. So these are the futures of glaucoma management, which we will see in coming decade or so. Thank you. So I finished my talk.
So Dr. Arora is joined.
Hello, Dr. Raju Parekh.
Hello, doctor. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing, sir?
That was a so high-end communication. I enjoyed listening to you. Yeah, it's truly current concepts. So I'm not sure who is how this is being done because I think Dr. Prashant Babunkule is there.
Dr. Pal, you can invite Dr. Ajay Arora.
So the next talk is Dr. Arora. Your talk.
I'm not sure how they're going to go to. I don't mind presenting.
I am whether Dr. Prashant. I can see his name, but he's muted and his video also is off. So I don't know whether he's there or not.
Mhm.
So I think then I would invite you for a talk.
Okay, I can start.
So I would invite Dr. Arora now for his talk. Dr. Arora, please will you share your screen and
Okay, I'll do that. Can you see my slide?
yeah, Dr. Arora, your voice is clear. Your slides are visible.
Thank you.
And I invite Dr. Arora to talk about macular hole management. Dr. Arora, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you. And it's my, I thank Janta Pharma and Ordinary Surgeon Society for giving me this opportunity of to present my work on macular hole current concepts in retina and glaucoma. So I think it's 15 minutes, no? Yeah. So essentially, macular hole could be either idiopathic, which is the most common, or it could be traumatic. And whenever we examine a patient with a macular hole, these are basic pre-op examinations which we need to do: a good slit and a biomicroscopy, looking at best corrected visual acuity, metamorphopsia, Amsler, SD-OCT, good evaluation of retinal periphery, and overall general examination to assess whether the patient can lie face down. The best predictor of macular hole success is the starting visual acuity, shorter duration of symptoms, smaller macular hole. The stage 1 macular hole may close spontaneously, but the holes greater than stage 2 need to be operated. This was what Dr. Gass had proposed, the classification of macular hole, and he did it all together without the OCT, just on pure clinical examination. The OCT has not really improved much upon Dr. Gass's observations. So we have holes from stage 1 to stage 4. The stage 4, there is a complete PVD. The international classification was put forth in 2013, and the holes have been classified into small holes, medium are less than 400 microns, and large are more than 400 microns. And I suppose many people believe that holes which are more than 800 microns could be labeled as ultra large. Chun et al. Believe that small holes should be 250, and between 250 to 600 or 650 should be the medium holes, and above that should be large holes, because the holes up to 650 behave in a similar manner. Now, how do we treat these macular holes? One is spontaneous closure. This is when the hole is about 50 to 100, this not 10, is 100 microns without a vitreomacular adhesion, about 2.7 to 8.6% is closed. Ocriplasmin, which is actually very expensive. So I have not personally used it, but it is it's available. It's not really picked up because of the expense. And it can be used in selected cases of holes which are less than 400 microns with a closure in about 40% cases versus 10% cases where any injection would work as a placebo. Now, most cases would require a vitrectomy, and essentially in vitrectomy, we remove the entire hyaloid posteriorly, either by dilutive fluorescein, which we used to do long time back, but now we use Transcolon. And then we do various techniques of eyelid peeling, which I'll be discussing subsequently, followed by a gas tamponade and rarely oil tamponade. So it would either be SF6, C2F6, or C3F8 isofluoropropane and a phase down position. Now, macular OCT, we can have an intra OCT, which improves your skills, but I don't have an access to an intra OCT, but nonetheless, the macular hole surgery technique remains the same. The other options are neurosensory graft, arcuate retinotomy, radial incisions, and in cases of posterior staphyloма, a macular buckle. Now, how do we handle ILM? We can either do an inverted ILM flap, which was described by the Nowaroki group, a petaloid or a cabbage closure. The cabbage closure was described by us and published in 2016. Then you have a free ILM flap, especially in recurrent macular hole, or we can use lens capsule, amniotic membrane, or an autologous neurosensory retinal. So this was described by Grewal and Mahmood in 2016, where they took a patient who was a refractory macular hole and a free neurosensory graft was put, which showed a microperimetric improvement in patient's visual acuity and from 20 by 200 to 20 by 80 in 3 months' time. And this is really picked up, and a lot of people are doing it. Now, this technique has not really picked up, where you make a arcuate retinotomy, which the authors described in 6 patients, and they had success in about 83% patients, where you create a full thickness this thing with a 25 gauge scissor. The retinal flap is mobilized with a soft tip, and it makes the whole oval and eventually closes. Or you can make these 5 perifoveal radial incisions, starting 1 disc diameter away from the hole and moving towards the center, and then you move the flaps with a soft tip. Now, before we peel the ILM, we have to use dyes to be able to identify the ILM, and various options are available. Most often in India, we use brilliant blue green or an ICG, and I'll be sharing that with you. So this is a small study we did, and this is about, the data is still about 3 years back. There were about 33 eyes where we had macular holes varying from 494 to 1100 microns, 30 holes closed, 3 remained open. There was type 1 closure in 26 and type 2 closure in 4 eyes. These are some of the examples of the hole closure. You can see here beautifully pre-op and post-op, the holes have closed well. And most of our cases, we are using the cabbage technique, which I will show you. This is again a patient where ERM was there, with a pass-through navigation ERM with the fluorescent thinning, and patient did well. Now, whenever you have a large macular hole, we have to have a large inverted flap, and there are various techniques that have been described. One of our technique is to use a cabbage closure technique. And we have now about 6 cases varying between 808 to 1200 microns. And I'll share with you the video of the case and how we did it. So these are various indices which we normally record in our patients. And this is just to show you the video. So this is a 25 gauge vitrectomy. We put in the infusion ports. We put in the other ports and a chandelier, and a vitrectomy is done where if you can see the vitreous very well enough, I can identify the posterior hyaloid. I may not use triamcinolone, but triamcinolone gets absorbed to the vitreous surface, and it actually helps in visualizing the posterior hyaloid. So now the hyaloid has been lifted up, ICG staining has been done, and we create this flap. You can see here a flap is being created. So this flap is inverted over the macular hole, and it is left like that. So please notice here, each flap will have a retinal surface and a vitreous surface. Now this is important. I'll explain to you why this is important. So we can create 3 to 5 flaps, and supposing sometimes you may lose 1 flap also, it doesn't matter, because you have enough number of flaps to cover the entire large macular hole pretty well. So the staining with the ICG is very good, and the last flap is the third flap is being made. We'll make 1 more flap after this. So The reason why I said vitreal and retinal surface is important because we did some EM studies on the ILM and we found that the surface configuration of the ILM on the vitreal surface and retinal surfaces are different. And if you place the retinal surface over the vitreous surface of a previous flap, it will stick to it like a Velcro. So this is how we have created these flaps. If the flaps are large, you could actually trim it, or you can leave it and generally the hole closes and these flaps gradually are not visible subsequently. You can see them for some time on the OCT, but subsequently they really do not cause an issue. But sometimes when you try to cut them, you might end up by removing the entire flap. So we have done the entire surgery, put in gas, and so let us see. This is the patient. She was a 61 years female with blurred vision of one eye. This is her anterior segment status. The left eye visual acuity was 6/36. This is the pre-op OCT. This is the Octa slabs at the ORCC as well as at the superficial slab. And this is the post-op situation. The visual acuity had improved, the macular hole had closed, and you can see the ILM flap lying on the macular hole. The ORCC slab, if you look at the previous one, you find that you find this highly reflective thing on the ORCC because you can see the RP, but that is all closed and the macular hole is closed here. So this is the pre-op and this is the post-op, and patient had come recently. Patient visual acuity had improved to 612. We have to wait for almost 6 months to 1 year sometimes to get the final best corrected visual acuity. This is another patient where this was the first time when we did a cabbage technique. This was this was a male patient who had come. This was post cataract surgery. This was a large macular hole pre-op, and we had that time used BBG for this. Used the cabbage technique. There were 3 flaps inverted and trimmed and put securely over the macular area. This is the OCT 3 weeks subsequently. This is 3 and 14 weeks, and you can see glial tissue growing and bridging the macular hole. Surprisingly, this patient's visual acuity had improved significantly, and he from a level of 360 had come to 6/24. So he's doing well, and after we operated his this eye, he actually got his other eye to got operated. So what is the rationale of a surgical technique? It's very important to have a well-stained ILM so that it can be picked around the macular hole, divided into multiple leads like the cabbage, and put over the macular hole. As I said, there's a vitreal surface and there's a retinal surface. When you put these flaps over each other, they sort of stick to each other like a Velcro. And once they're juxtaposed, they close the macular hole like as a closed chamber. So I believe that this closure actually generates centrifugal forces on the edges of the macular hole, and this may contribute towards the closure of the macular hole. Also, this creates a closed space and activates the RPE pump, which may become active in a closed space, aiding in the hole closure. It is critical to spend some time on the table before and after the fluid gas exchange to ensure that the ILM flaps are well juxtaposed, they are attached to each other, and once they get well attached to each other, they will not move out, and the chances of your failing are very little. So this is just to sum up, good staining of the ILM. We do a complete vitrectomy, remove the highlight, well-made ILM flaps, fluid gas exchange, tone positioning. I generally ask my patients to lie face down for about 10 to 12 hours, at least for a week. We tell them about 12 days, but most of the patients here in our country, if you tell them 12 days, at least they'll do for a week's time. So we do that, and that has worked really well. Thank you for your attention, and I hope there is a take home for you. And if this technique really works well in my hands, I'm sure if you do it well, it's going to work well for you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very nice talk, Dr. Arora. I'm sure Dr. Prashant can, have
Yeah,
discuss
Prashant can ask me
because,
questions. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, yes.
I
Thank you,
could
Dr.
talk about
Rajul. In fact, wonderful technique. In fact, various ways this technique, basically all the new techniques of ILM peeling and thereby inverting and stuffing it into the macular hole. People have named it in various ways. Some people do it half peel, some people do temporal peel and whatnot. Yes, cabbage is a, I think, preferred technique across the world. People have named it differently. Ajay names it, calls it the cabbage one. So that's beautiful and
Yeah, thank you.
beautiful illustration of cases, Ajay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think Dr. Arora, you can invite Dr. Prashant.
Yeah,
You
so
talk.
everybody knows Prashant. He needs no introduction. And Prashant is a prolific vitreoretina surgeon. He is also a prolific quiz master. Yes, Prashant, let's say you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, can you see my slides now?
Yeah.
Well, I'm supposed to speak on giant retinal tear. It's not proceeding.
You
So click on
move
the
it with
slide.
the arrow on the bottom.
Click
The
on the slide
arrow on
and
the
then
bottom.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
correct.
good. Yeah, thank you. So everyone knows that giant retinal tear means a tear which is more than 3 clock hours, and typically it has the edges have a tendency to roll back. Once upon a time, a dreaded detachment. Now it is quite a comfortable surgery because of improved success rate, because of that improvement in technology and better understanding of the pathophysiology of this disease. Wide angle weaving system, perfluorocarbons, small gauge vitrectomies, high speed cutters, and now vault cannulas have added comfort to the kitty of vitreoretinal surgeons. So these are my 10 pearls for people who do vitreoretina. First, most important thing, however tough the any surgery is, to keep your basics right. And so here is the basic what we teach our postgraduates or fellows. You have to confirm the placement of infusion cannula once you place it inside the vitreous cavity. Well, here you can see the flap of the giant retinal tear was blocking the infusion cannula. And that would have meant a subretinal infusion of the fluid which was going inside the eye. So you need to trim it with the help of a vitreous cutter adequately so that the infusion cannula, the flow through of the fluid through the infusion cannula happens unhampered. The second thing is the controversy about putting an encircling band or a buckle in a case of a giant retinal tear. Well, all vitreoretinal diseases, especially detachments, have an abnormal vitreous base, which leads to tangential traction. So if you put an encircling band or a belt buckle or a scleral buckle, that leads to relief of this traction, which is likely to reopen the break or lead to extension of into uninvolved retina. Fine, the point against it is that giant retinal tear, which is usually more than 180 clock hours, acts as a retinectomy, which leads to release of traction otherwise also. Yes, so buckle has a limited role, especially in a phakic patient with inferior giant retinal tear or a patient who is having PVR along with this. And this giant retinal tear should be less than 180. If it is more than 180 degrees, please, there is no need of doing a belt buckle. And if you have to put a belt buckle, it should be seeing that it should be low height and the giant retinal tear should lie flat on the surface of the buckle and not on the edge of it. Well, the second most important step, or the most important step during vitreoretinal surgery, is the induction of PVD. Fortunately, in the case of giant retinal tear, PVD usually pre-exists, except in cases which are secondary to trauma or familial vitreoretinal degeneration when the vitreous is very sticky. The other challenge of induction PVD is that when you're doing an active suction here, because of a closed space, it comes into a cutter. So you can create a space by draining subretinal fluid. Then the other way is to help two instruments to maneuver, remove the membranes over the posterior pole, and then create a space by putting a PFCL bubble. And after putting and stabilizing the retina over posterior pole, then you continue peeling the membranes and the PVD induction into the periphery. Now, another important step during vitreoretinal surgery is about the base excision. Here, the setting of a vitreous cutter is at a low vacuum and a highest speed, preferably 10,000 cuts or something like that. So let us see some of the examples. So this here, I'm doing a vitreous base excision. You have to do adequate base excision that will prevent reproliferation. More importantly, you should concentrate on the horns of the or the edges of the giant retinal tear, which should be free of the vitreous in the opposite meridian, because residual vitreous in the opposite meridian leads to reproliferation. And you can see under air, I'm doing the base excision of the opposite meridian adequately. Now, regarding the lens, should a crystalline lens be sacrificed for having an adequate vitrectomy and base excision is always a matter of debate. But yes, we firmly believe that there is no need to sacrifice a crystalline clear lens. Well, the only indication for removing a lens is when it is cataractous or there is a pre-existing subluxation or dislocation. This is a video that demonstrates the base excision, a clear phakic eye under high magnification, and you can see the beautifully. If you depress hard the sclera and get the pars plana into the mid-vitreous cavity, you do not need to, you will not hurt the lens, and you can do an adequate base excision. What is the need? Well, you can see 180 degrees. You are doing absolutely. You can even see the ora serrata here. Okay. The anterior flap of the giant retinal tear, whatever is the residual flap, is tissue, and it acts as a scaffold for anterior loop and rubeosis. And therefore, the dictum is it should always be excised. As you can see, I'm excising the anterior residual flap of the giant retinal tear with the help of a vitreous cutter. And it should be done adequately. Sometimes you have to depress the sclera to reach out to the last bit of the residual flap. Well, there are certain situations where you cannot remove the residual flap for some reasons. And if you have a residual flap, do not leave it like that. You can laser it so that the rubeosis does not happen. It does not lead to ischemic response and rubeosis. Now, once you have cleared the vitreous, you have done the base excision, naturally you have to unfold the retina, and that is very challenging. So this is a case of a 270-degree giant retinal tear where I am now using two instruments. One is light pipe and the other is a flute needle, just to unroll the flap, identify the disc. And once you identify the disc, you slowly have to inject the PFCL bubble, keeping a watch on the pulsation so that you do not inject and create a IOP high, as well as see that you raise the bubble height up to the edge of posterior edge of the giant retinal tear. After that, you roll it in the opposite direction and you will have a, you can remove the residual fluid behind it. Now, after removing, after putting a PFCL bubble, you also need to unfold the flap, retinal flap, which can be there. Like you have put a PFCL bubble, the JRT flap has not well unrolled itself completely. Well, you can use a blunt forceps or a brush needle or something like that, a blunt instrument, to just unroll the flap which has got rolled under, or at the roll which has not opened under the PFCL bubble. And see, slowly nudging the rolled in flap, you can just flatten the retina under PFCL. Giant retinal folded flap here, and pulling the retinal flap, trying to unroll and remove the fibrous tissue there. But equally important in such cases is the removal of the peripheral associated PVR. Unless you remove the PVR in the periphery, in the other quadrants as well, this flap is not going to flatten, and therefore is the importance of removing the flap even at the cost of retinectomy. The tissue is quite fibrous there, and you can see persistent. If you are persistent, you can even roll such a stiff flap. Once you unroll the flap, you need to laser it under PFCL initially, and the laser burn should be moderately gray. It should not be white. Basically, that means you have caused necrosis and that will lead to further proliferations and so here under PFCL, I'm putting 3 to 4 rows of giant lasers just behind the edge of a giant retinal tear. After that, you do a fluid air exchange, partial fluid air exchange, PFCL exchange, and under air, you are completing. You have to give more importance to the edge of the horns of the giant retinal tear. Here you can put additional few rows of laser because these are the areas where the giant retinal tear can give way. I have spoken about the importance of lasering the residual flap, anterior flap, to prevent rubeosis. Now, after PFCL is put, naturally it has to be replaced at the end with the air or with a silicone oil. There are two ways. You can either do PFCL silicone oil exchange, which is a messy affair, at least at my hands. I prefer to do PFCL fluid air exchange, and then air. Once you have a air in the vitreous cavity, I put the silicone oil, which is an easy thing. So how do you prevent the posterior slippage while you are doing this step is, you should avoid high broad buccals, and the PFCL should be brought up to the edge of giant retinal tear. Now I will show you, these are various 180-degree giant retinal tear, 320-degree GRT, and this is 360 giant retinal tear with PVR, and how I prevent slippage. This is with a fluid needle under passive effusion. I'm tapping the every millimeter of the giant retinal tear. You have to be very meticulous, very patient. And if you tap and milk out the last drop of the subretinal fluid at the edges of giant retinal tear, the unrolling of the flap is not seen. Well, that was 180 degrees. This is 270-degree giant retinal tear. Only this area is attached. And see, I'm meticulously in every millimeter wise. I go all 270 degrees to tap every millimeter of giant retinal tear. And so at the end of the procedure, you will see there is not a millimeter of slippage of the flap. And this is 360-degree giant retinal tear, where I have intentionally created because of severe PVR. We have done a 360-degree giant, retinectomy. And you can see, even in such aggressive 360-degree GRT, in spite of PVR, which has been relieved, if you do meticulous tapping all around 360 degrees, there is no slippage. Well, not all giant retinal tears are just plain giant retinal tears with detachment. Sometimes they have associated pathologies as well. So here I see an epiretinal membrane under PFCL, and I'm trying to peel the ERM. So you have to tackle the concomitant pathology which exists along with it. Then I stain it and then remove the internal limiting membrane. Well, this is another concomitant pathology. You have a macular hole with a severe PVR as well. So here, macular hole, already Ajay has very well said. What is the basic principle is to peel internal limiting membrane and relieve the traction. But in these cases with associated peripheral PVR, relief of peripheral PVR is equally important, so that macular hole also closes as well as the retinal tear flattens. And this is what exactly I'm doing. After peeling the ILM, I'm also trying to remove the peripheral PVR. The retina was very stiff in these cases, so we had to do a 360-degree giant retinectomy. And once we did a retinectomy, retina could fall flat and the macular hole could close simultaneously. Sometimes it is associated with more severe PVRs like this. And here, tackling the concomitant pathology in the form of severe PVR with GRT is another challenge, which I would just run through it. And this is another case of severe PVR along with giant retinal tear. So tamponade, yes, silicone oil is a preferred tamponade, as you must have seen, especially so in inferior GRTs PVR. Gas is restricted to only few cases of superior GRT, which are fresh enough and where the separation of retina is not significant enough. But by choice, it is silicone oil. Well, you follow all the pearls on a given day, but sometimes it's not a day, your day. So you will see in this case, well, I have done everything fine. Now I'm doing PFCL air exchange. And at the end of the procedure, what I notice is a small pocket of fluid subretinally. Well, it is such a small, and the retina otherwise is not slipped. So you can leave and the next day it will be flattened. Well, here, when I'm doing fluid PFCL air exchange, you can see PFCL bubble going beneath and the retina started unfolding. Well, you just have to be patient, use a flute needle to tap those PFCL bubble, and then again start tapping the edges of giant retinal tear, and under air, it will flatten. So persistence. So be persistent, be meticulous, follow the rules, you will win the war. And this is the last case where we have done 360-degree giant retinal tear. And when I finish the thing, I notice a residual fold over here. In such severe PVRs, you have to accept such folds, and most of the times in due course, once you position after silicone oil, this fold will flatten. So friends, if you follow all these rules of managing a giant retinal tear meticulously, most of the times you can put smile in not only on the face of your patient, but also on you for doing a good job. Thank you.
Excellent. It's beautiful videos, Prashant.
Thank you, Vijay.
Very, very nice. I wonder whether we can ask any questions which I have. Maybe it's for the delegates who are watching us, whom we don't know. We can't see them. It's very unfortunate. We are virtual. So we don't really know who is watching, who is not watching. For their benefit, I want to ask you 2-3 questions.
Please do.
So Prashant, when you said that you do after the PFCL injection, you put in air. So do you do complete removal of PFCL with air and then do a silicone oil exchange, or do you do a partial air and then do
No,
PFCL silicone oil exchange?
Ajay, naturally, it has to be a total. Either you do a complete PFCL silicone oil exchange or a PFCL air exchange, and then air you inject a silicone oil. How we go.
So what I have been doing is been following this, and this we learned it. This is called, I know you may have heard it called a sandwich technique, where we bring the PFCL up to the edge of the giant retinal tear, and then we do an air exchange, go to the margin of it, and whatever fluid is there, we remove it. And once we've done the sandwich technique, then we go ahead and laser under the PFCL. Once we have lasered under PFCL and we assure that all the fluid is gone away, then I do a PFCL silicone. So I'm sure there are multiple ways of skinning a cat, and that's why.
As I said in my initial part only, I somehow don't like PFCL silicone oil exchange. Yes, that is how I learned when I was in Shankar Netralaya. But over a period of time with better technology, I learned that PFCL air exchange is more controlled, and then it becomes less messy just to inject an oil actively, So it's just evolution probably.
Sure. The other thing was you do laser under PFCL?
Yeah, as I said, I fill the PFCL up to the edge of the giant retinal tear.
Yeah.
First few rows, I put it under air fluid. So that there is some chorioretinitis which holds the retina when I'm doing a PFCL air exchange. Some gluing type of a thing is there. And then after completing, what happens when you're doing a laser under PFCL, there might be some residual fluid between the retina and the choroid and the residual RP. And that does not give you adequate laser burns many a times, small thin film. And that is why after you complete that air exchange and the retina is only flat against the choroid, you get a very good intense burns with the help of a simple lasers, even at a low energy.
Right. Well, thank you, Prashant, for those lovely videos. It was, very, very nice. Is there any more questions? Maybe Dr. Parekh can ask us something very new and we won't be able to answer.
I think we had enough discussions on retina. Somehow we gave him a step motherly treatment. None of us asked him.
Oh, yes. I just appreciated all the newer things which you were saying, and it's so interesting that how things have changed in every subspecialty.
Yes.
There's a significant change.
But Rajul sir,
please call me Rajul.
Yeah, Rajul, whatever. The thing is, those home-based perimeters, are they? You said they are reproducible like any Humphrey perimeters.
Yeah. So the agreement is good. The palm scan and MRF, the Melbourne Rapid, so both have a threshold algorithm also. The problem is they do not have progression software. So at this point in time, for glaucoma, Monitor glaucoma, no, but we can do a diagnosis.
No, but the thing is, I mean is, see, who will do a home perimetry is a patient who is already diagnosed case, then only he will expect and buy all those
So-
fancy stuffs.
So just the 3 weeks back, no, buying me. Basically, then you have to have one technician who goes to all the patient's house, because when I say I was talking about teleglaucoma, na, so the IOP sensor, which is the clinical trials, already the results are published. So you can, along with the IOL, they put the chip. Along with the ML glaucoma, they put the chip. So it measures the continuous IOP monitoring. So there are apps which will be available, like SlitLamp on the mobile. So the patient take a photograph, your IOP, and your technician who goes to home with the perimetry and OCT, the portable OCT. So then the patient doesn't have to come every 2 months for glaucoma OPD. So that is the long-term future. I don't see a near future.
But
How
feel
much does the home perimetry
my daughter
cost?
was asking when
No,
we
but-
my daughter was asking me other day when my brother-in-law was working from home since last 1 year, Papa, when will you work from home?
So, so the Dr. Arora, the cost, the palm scan, I think they're selling it around 5 or 6 lakh or something like that, maybe 4 lakh. I don't remember exactly. And it's a threshold algorithm, and uses the ZEST technology, not the same as the like Sita Fast, the ZEST technology. So, and they kept it for I think 5 days, and we did in 10, 18, 20 patients. It was good agreement. I did in my
Good
way also.
agreement with the Humphreys.
Humphrey, yes. But no
So-
progression software.
So with the COVID being there and patients not willing to come, you think that this is a good option?
For one time, yes, but the progression at this point in time, they don't have software.
Okay.
So once they have, and that's what the last month we had Professor Weinreb, and he was saying that the portable OCT machine also do not have glaucoma software for progression, but they are working on it. So in that case, in next pandemic or next wave,
I don't wish that.
no, next wave, next pandemic, maybe we will able to manage from home.
Okay.
Weinreb remembers me because I did my fellowship in UCSD. So
Okay.
Dr. Weinreb is the chief of Shiloh.
Shaili, yes.
He is the chief of Shiloh.
And now he's promoted.
He is promoted.
So he's head of ophthalmology also now.
No, he was head of ophthalmology before also. No, you mean to say head of ophthalmology of UCSD, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. He had become the chief of ophthalmology UCSD. Yeah. So I think it's wonderful. So I think we have to say bye-bye. There comes a
Yes.
point of time we have to leave. It sounds very strange in a virtual environment, but we have to.
Yes. Okay.
Let's take it.
Nice.
Bye, take care.
Chalo, thank you. Take care. Yeah. We have to meet soon somewhere.
Let's hope for the best.
Yeah.
The next
Thanks.
conference will be physical.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully.
Bye bye.
Bye.